Hey guys, and welcome to an emergency episode of
I
RadialSpark
would have called it a
Radio.
special edition.
I guess we call it a breaking news special edition, however you want to pull it. But I think unless you've been living under a rock the last couple of days, there was a major outage in the IT ecosystem. CrowdStrike turned off 8.5 million Windows machines, which had dramatic effects across the industry. And I believe did about it. Just you could check my numbers on this because I think the article you originally found pulled this up about $5.4 billion of damages, right?
Yeah. I'll be honest. If it weren't so terrifying, it would be kind of a really fun and interesting case study. What happened here?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this kind of like a case study, and frankly, as a wake-up call for a lot of people who are looking at, who have Salesforce, who have Microsoft systems, and who haven't yet looked at Heroku, AWS, or other platforms, and maybe should start looking. So that's going to be the point of this discussion here. But before we get into the solution, let's talk about what happened. So Justin, CrowdStrike, something, blue screen to death. My Windows machine exploded. I couldn't do my job. My flight was delayed. What happened? Give us the lowdown.
Everybody's favorite B-side. So, in a nutshell, an update was pushed to a CrowdStrike product called Falcon sensor that caused an operating system level failure. Effectively, as a computer would boot up and try to load the CrowdStrike software, it would keep crashing the blue screen. So it could never fully initialize. To explain how or why something like this happens very briefly, it helps to understand what CrowdStrike Falcon is. And in a nutshell, it's an edge device protection and like antivirus software. So for like
before we go in, what's an edge device? Like, so everyone knows what we're talking about. Like,
we're talking about like the devices that your business users, like the boots on the ground, would wear. And honestly, as I say that, I realize I should probably correct myself, because CrowdStrike Falcon does also protect servers and like core infrastructure. But it's like, you have a Windows laptop, you need antivirus on it, you need to detect threat vectors that could occur on that device. That's what CrowdStrike Falcon's monitoring and trying to like intercept and handle. So in a nutshell, like the 5-year-old children's friendly version of this is CrowdStrike Falcon is equivalent to like a business specialized Norton antivirus or McAfee. And in fact, Falcon Sensor, the specific piece of software that failed, is the kernel level antivirus that's actually looking for the threats. So very briefly, the update that happened, because I'm sure some people who are familiar with the IT infrastructure are just like, well, there should have been all kinds of quality checks, things like this. When we're talking about antivirus software, there's something you have to kind of keep in mind. A lot of antivirus specialists, that they'll talk about like 0-hour, 0-day attacks. When a malicious actor releases a virus or a cyber attack, this is not a company releasing a software update. They're not like, hey, check out our new cyber threat coming out on Thursday. Here's the release notes. This is what you need to know. It just happens. And odds are, like, a successful attack is going to bypass a couple machines. Somebody's gonna be like, wait, this isn't working, what's happening? And it ends up being manually reported. Like, the symptoms are identified, it gets sent to security specialists who are constantly monitoring for this kind of stuff. And they are reverse engineering the attack. They're like, okay, what are we looking for? What are the behavioral patterns? What is this doing? And then they're trying to push out updates to what this threat is, to their product, to all their subscribers, all their customers. So all these antivirus companies that like talk about, hey, we protect against 0-day attacks, things like that, what they're effectively saying is that they're monitoring for new threats every day. And when these are getting reported by monitoring agencies, by companies, they're creating those, and you might have seen this in like even just like Microsoft antivirus, like they're creating those antivirus definitions. There's like, this is what this new threat looks like. This is what you should be looking for, antivirus software. Here's how you handle it. This is how you log and report it back to us to know that it happened. So there's a need for some expediency, right? Because a new attack's coming out, it's trying to go as far as it can, and these guys are trying to lock it down. So this is not like a software update that's going through like, hey, we've got days, weeks, months to run quality checks on. This is a, hey, we found it, we want to get this out to our consumer, potentially like within hours, if possible, to protect as many people as possible. And antivirus software is actually written in such a way where you have your core thing that's like the actual software, and then you basically have a catalog of all the threats that tell the software, this is what you're looking for, this is how you handle it. So the update was an update to the catalog. It wasn't actually changing the software, it was just adding new, like, this is new configuration, new things to look at.
Right. And what it did was it actually misidentified a core piece of functioning Windows architecture and brought the house down. To keep it
close but not quite. For anybody who's a Salesforce developer, null pointer exception, basically pointing to something that didn't exist. Yeah. And the code was like, we don't know how to handle this. And because it's antivirus software at the operating system level, it has to initialize as part of the boot up. So an error that's unhandled at that level prevents boot up. And the what was insidious, what made this so costly and so damaging is the antivirus software is designed to let you like push out these updates in near real time from the cloud. Like, we've got new definitions, go. But your computer has to be up. It has to be connected to the internet to be able to receive these. So when you have a bug like this that prevents your computer from fully booting, it crashes before connecting to the internet and everything there, you have to locally on the computer fix the blue screen of death so that it can reconnect to the internet and then get a healthy version of the update or fix itself. So it is, call it a rather innocuous mistake that happens all the time in programming that prevented computers from booting. So now IT specialists the world over had to go like machine by machine and fix the BSOD so that the computers could boot and then the antivirus could be fixed. Like, that's what happened.
Yeah. And so for the most part, like, you're looking at a bunch of like a bunch of industries were affected. Like, obviously Delta is still reeling from this. Yes. And I mean, a lot of what they had to deal with is all the logistic, like, because again, like Delta's logistics operations or any airline's logistics operations get completely upset for a day. It has ripple effects throughout. Like, so anyone that it's in any sort of supply chain management or logistics management, that you guys all know, like, what an outage will do to your entire week, month, year.
If your product's time sensitive, this kind of thing is dangerous, right? Because if you can't launch a flight, all those passengers now need to be rebooked on other flights. And so it shifts your entire schedule.
And you can't even rebook them because the machines don't work and the server is down and everything. It's all bad.
Yeah, it's devastating.
So again, like this hit airlines, finance, healthcare, retailers, supermarkets. Like, I think those were the big ones, a bunch of Fortune 500 companies and other smaller companies down the road. All of which, the common thread between all of them is that none of them are IT security companies. None of them are software development companies. None of them are network and security infrastructure management firms. That is not their core competency. They're airlines, they're finance, they're Wall Street, they're healthcare providers.
None of these companies make their money on IT.
Yeah. So like IT arms in these firms all resemble a fraction of their year-to-year spend. They're a cost center at worst, and maybe in some cases for some of the companies they're doing some innovation or whatnot, but for the most part, like a lot of these, like especially the larger Fortune 500 companies, unless you're working on bringing yourself into like the AI age or the IoT age or the big data age, like any of those ages that we've seen come through.
Yeah.
The cloud age, which we're going to be talking about here in about a second, because a lot of these guys weren't in the cloud age yet, which is why they were affected so drastically. And we'll talk about some mitigating factors of how to avoid some of this. But they're not innovating. Their main job isn't to detect threats. They've outsourced that to a company like CrowdStrike, to that software for them to handle it. So this type of failure, Justin, is something that was unprecedented worldwide. Nothing like this has brought down this many computers ever before.
This
and
is
I
the
think
single largest IT
the single
failure.
largest. And I think the thing that people really need to get their head around here is that this won't be the last time. And it won't be the last time for a couple of reasons. And so I want to talk a little bit about why was Windows affected? Like, why was this the thing that happened? Because if this CrowdStrike software, the Falcon software is not just for Windows, it also goes on Linux and iOS as well, correct?
Yeah, and like Mac OS, iOS. Yeah,
Mac
so
OS, iOS.
it's multi-platform. Like not the full feature set, but even some parts of Falcon will support Chrome OS, like Chromebooks.
Yeah.
But here's kind of what you have to remember. For each operating system, like when you're developing that driver, the thing that ties in to your kernel level for the operating system, each of those is going to be platform specific, right? So you're developing your Windows driver using the optimal language for Windows. You're developing your Mac OS driver for your required proprietary languages for Mac OS development. Like everything's getting, like the drivers are being shipped separately for each platform, and then these configuration files, the definitions of the threats, they're getting distributed out to all of these. So in this case, because, and again, I like playfully called it like null pointer exception, it had to do with the way that the Windows driver was interacting with the new configuration file that was coming in, that was causing the misbehavior in that operating system only. The other drivers were handling it correctly, and it wasn't throwing like this unhandled exception.
Right. So I think the point that I want to drive to is the fact that like this seems to be like a one-off issue. Like it seems like someone made an oopsie, there was insufficient testing, but the problem is that vendors like CrowdStrike are in a really tough bind where, like you mentioned, like 0 day, it's like the virus makers aren't going like, hey, here's the patch notes, here's all the systems we're about to compromise, good luck, and then there's a race. It's like, boom, they did it, something happened, we need to fix today, now.
It's always in response to an emergent threat. So you're going as fast as you can.
And sometimes you get white hat hackers and they spot some of these threats earlier and they're able to incorporate it. But like something like this was like an emergency update. Like you don't have a lot of testing time. System's already compromised. You need to push the patch out now. And this is why I wanted to talk about why this isn't going to be the last time something like this happens. Because in the age of AI and large language models, if you guys want to go into like, especially like any of our like people who are technical, like who watch this program, who, let's say you guys are familiar with Salesforce and Apex and whatnot, go ask ChatGPT to write a bit of Apex, give it some parameters, give it some information, a little bit of training, and have it pull together some Apex or some Lightning Web Components. And you'll find that it's going to do a pretty decent job. The publicly available, like super cheap or free to use, like trial version ChatGPT will do a reasonable job at building some code. And the thing that you guys have to understand is that Windows is the #1 operating system throughout the world. It's the most attacked one because it is the #1. Like a lot of people have misconceptions that like Mac is somehow more secure. And they're slowly finding out that that's not the case. It's not because Mac was special because of how Mac, iOS or Mac OS was built on Linux foundation. Sorry, iOS wasn't, but Mac OS is built on a Linux foundation. that it was somehow more secure. It's just no, it's, security through obscurity. No one cared about it because no one was really using Macs in business and personal computing. That has shifted, and now you're seeing more attacks go that direction. But Windows is still by and large the market leader when it comes to operating systems. So they're going to continue to be attacked, but now we've democratized with LLM the ability to write basic code, to build viruses, to do attacks like this through malicious use of large language models. I'm not saying like someone can go in and just use ChatGPT to build me a virus. A lot of these large, corporations with LLMs are going to shut that down. But you can't tell me with a straight face that malicious actors out there in the world aren't going to try this, whether it be different countries. I know people like to use like scapegoat, like Russia or China or things like that. That are going to put together their own large language models to build, hacking groups instead of just really smart people. Now you have really smart people plus the power of AI and computation to start quickly developing this. And it's going to be an arms race. And if you're looking at this arms race that is happening right now, you need to understand that you're in it. You're not just watching from the side going like, luckily this didn't affect me, right? Or if it did affect you, it's like, oh, this is a one-time thing. It's like, this is the beginning of the arms race. And this is why I want to talk about to the customers out there who were affected by this Microsoft bug, who have Salesforce, and who have looked at migrating away from this client server paradigm and looked at going to the cloud. It's probably now the time to start looking at Heroku. Like, you guys need to start migrating some of these applications over to Heroku. And if you do, you do with the understanding that you're not there to fight the battle by yourself. If you're sitting there going like, I need to have a death grip on this, I need full control over my hardware, over my network, over my infrastructure, I need to be the guy. This should be the wake-up call for everyone who's not in some regulated business that requires it, some very specific use case that absolutely needs to have it. Anyone who's sitting there going like, yeah, this isn't necessary for me to do it this way, we just have done it this way. Now it's time to really think about making the switch. Now it's time to start migrating, especially if you already have Salesforce. And this is what we talked about on the program a lot. Like, Heroku has a native data integration, tightly coupled tools to your Salesforce ecosystem. Like, if you're already using Salesforce and you've tied into these client server paradigms and you have edge devices deployed with Windows frameworks on there, and you're using CrowdStrike or a similar program and you dodge the bullet here, do those edge devices need to be Windows based? Do you need to have that client server set up in such a way, or can you migrate that to the cloud? Can you build your Heroku app and can you integrate your data there? Because when you do that, you're no longer on the front lines. You now have Amazon Web Services, a multi-billion dollar company whose sole purpose is to make sure stuff like this pretty much doesn't happen, because if it does happen, they lose business to Google Cloud, to Microsoft Azure, to everyone else out there that's ready to take down Amazon. They spend more on IT security than a bunch of these Fortune 500 companies that were affected, who spent entirely on their IT combined. Like, it's not even close. They'll spend billions of dollars to prevent this stuff from happening, and have risk mitigation factors when there is a breach to make sure they get up online and something like this doesn't completely shut them down. You have that ally in your corner. So if you're not seriously looking at moving over to Heroku, moving some of your key mission critical apps over to Heroku, like, you're making a mistake. And now, Justin, because we're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, if I just put all my eggs in the Salesforce Heroku basket, how does that solve my problem? What if they get compromised? What if this happens? And so I'm going to pass the ball back to you. And so you could talk a little technical, don't go too deep, but why this whole vertically, like, I think you called it a vertically integrated solution.
Integration for IT.
Vertical integration for IT. Why these systems that did go down was so dramatic, and why they weren't able to recover quickly, whereas if they were on a Heroku Salesforce solution, they could. Justin, go.
So rather playfully, I'm going to say this comes down to understanding your core competency as a business, and I'm going to call it the Spider-Man principle. With great power comes great responsibility. So a lot of traditional IT mindsets come from this idea of like, I want to be able to control and micromanage every layer of my IT. And this plays into this idea of CrowdStrike, because CrowdStrike as a security vendor, you're still looking at, like, as an example, a CrowdStrike customer would have laptops, desktops, computers deployed with this CrowdStrike Falcon platform deployed on them. Then they might have their identity servers for like single sign-on and for their Active Directory and everything deployed with the Falcon platform on them. Their custom-built applications and servers deployed. And let's assume this is all on like Azure, running on Windows virtual machines that each have these things installed. What you've done is you've set this up where you're like, oh, I have a need, identity for my employees. But rather than just having an identity solution, you set up a Windows machine, full on OS level access and control with security that you've had to implement, and then with the identity solution deployed in it. You have the same security provider on your server and on your clients. So this Windows specific failure is now causing a server outage and a client outage. So it's not just like, oh, specific people can't access your thing through specific devices. It's like the service is down.
Well,
and
it's so down for because normally what would happen, and sorry to interject, normally what would happen, let's say like a bunch of clients like get wiped out by this, right? And not that it would be no big deal. It would still be a 911 fire alarm. Like IT guys are going to be up until midnight, like troubleshooting and whatnot. Yeah. But what would happen, it's like, all right, we're just going to forget these machines. We're just going to re-image them with the most recent backup. Boom, it's solved. We're just going to direct hardware. We're just going to take care of it. Like that's what you would do. And you would do that mostly remotely. Like you'd have low-level remote access before the machine boots to Windows. You just get in there, like disable stuff and just re-image the whole thing. Yep. But they couldn't do that because the server was also down and stored the images.
Oh, dude,
so they had to have these guys, they had to deploy their entire IT security staff to go in there to fix the server first before they can even go to the clients, like, and do that. And so they had to deploy everyone like around the clock to unravel this problem. Once they figured out what actually happened too, it wasn't just
there's a couple things.
Yeah. It's like, hey, the client
that make this worse. Right over it,
you know?
So the industry is affected by this. Like you said, this is airlines. This is banks like Wall Street.
Yeah.
These people don't make money on Windows IT. Like they're not making their money deploying these servers, deploying these devices. This is operational support. And why that matters is it means the IT teams they've staffed and deployed are scaled for operational support, just helping business users go about their day-to-day, deal with the random day-to-day errors or issues that come up, and helping those business users out. So for each one of these deployed devices, deployed servers, you're not like, oh, I've got an IT person on staff for every single one of my business people. It might be 1 to 10, 1 to 100, like, big numbers. And so when you say deploy everyone, you're still saying deploying a smaller fraction of your workforce to solve a problem that's crippled your whole business. Right. And none of this stuff that's caused the problem or that you're having to do to fix it is remotely related to the thing you're good at. Like the airline IT people, the banking IT people, these are here to help solve pseudo tech, pseudo business problems related to airline or banking things that come up on the computers. So let's do some crazy low level OS reconfig.
Right. And mess with kernels and blah, 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 which we've already lost half the audience.
This
is like, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. So we're going to stop that, because this is where the vertical integration piece comes into play. Right. Is if you're an airline, if you're a bank, like, should you care about Windows versus Linux versus Mac OS versus whatever? Like, you don't make money on the operating system level decision, and you don't make money on setting up your own security and all your own stuff on top of the operating system. So if you bring in somebody, and like you mentioned Heroku, like you bring in Heroku, you're like, I'm going to deploy my services, my cloud-based infrastructure. And I want to be careful, right? Because we talked about like server client and how do you really get to the cloud? And people say, well, like Azure's the cloud. But if you're deploying Windows images and like fully manually configured Windows operating systems with your own stuff on it, you're not really using a cloud platform. You're just using cloud hosted infrastructure. And so when you do that, these kinds of failures that end up having to be fixed on your end because your provider can't fix it from their end, that becomes your responsibility. And that's where this insane amount of cost, this $5.4 billion, like that's where this is completely unmitigated and there's nothing you can do to handle it. But let's say you bring in somebody like Heroku and you're like, okay, we're going to use Heroku for all of our server-based stuff. We're just going to build our services for Heroku on top of AWS, all of this. And you're like, well, still single point of failure. Like if something goes down in AWS, if something goes down in Heroku, but the difference between them having a failure that they have to fix on their end versus like you having a single point of failure with your security provider is you don't make your money on the IT side. AWS and Heroku do. So this outage happens and their product teams, their whole engineering staff, not like 1/10 or 1/100th of their staff gets rallied to fix this problem. We're talking about the entire fulfillment team gets brought in and does this and pulls this, because the thing that makes them money is your IT. And not only that, but they're going to have specialized disaster recovery processes in place, rolling back images platform wide, because like this is the crazy thing. Anybody who's familiar with like the concept of a null pointer exception, what that means is a programming thing, probably understands like that can actually be an insanely easy thing to fix. So on the CrowdStrike side, this update gets pushed out with the break. It breaks a bunch of systems. They're like, oh no, what happened? They do the root cause analysis, they find it, and then they fix that issue. The problem is their fix doesn't restore the distributed systems. The damage has already been done. When your platform provider does a fix, they relaunch everybody's services. So an AWS fix, a Heroku fix brings you back live. You're not responsible for relaunching your infrastructure with a healthy security platform. The entire platform is being relaunched by your vendor.
And I think that's
because they make their money on it, they are very invested in doing it like that.
Well, and I think that's the key thing, that this is what we want to talk about, why there's a key difference here. When people are like, wait, I'm just putting all my eggs from one basket to the other, is that the error that happened with CrowdStrike is CrowdStrike doesn't control or have access to your IT infrastructure. They're just software, security software.
Yep.
Right. That's it. That's all they do. So you have to have the specialist, whether it be at Microsoft Azure, let's say you have offshore that, a partner like RadialSpark who's managing some of your stuff, right? Or your internal IT team to be like, okay, well, CrowdStrike had an outage. They pushed a fix. Like, why isn't this working again? Like, you're a business user. You go, oh my God, why aren't we live again? And they just don't understand. It's like, yeah, they pushed a fix, but I can't even log into my machine. Like, and I don't even have access to the ones that are blown up. I can't just reset it. Like, I need to go talk to Microsoft to be like, hey, dude, my entire server wreck, it's gone. I need you to take the old images and I need to move them over here. It's a totally exceptional process. Please help me. And they're like, something happened, right? Or you have your own servers internally that you have, like you're not in the cloud at all. You're not even Azure. You just have your own server farms. And you're dealing with the same. Now you have to go in. You're like, oh wait, we got to get the whole IT. We got to wipe all the servers, start from scratch. Let's go get the backups. Let's do all this other stuff. Like, you got to mobilize that before you can even start fixing the problem. Whereas all that happens immediately over at an AWS, like, or GCP. They're sitting there going like, oh goodness, this has happened. We got to get on top of this. Where are our backups? Let's, like, this was the this is when you see with like Salesforce, when they roll out different updates and security updates, it's not like their entire platform, all their server farms at once. They say, hey, we're going to do the North America region, then we're going to do this region, because if one of them blows up, they're like, all right, we're just going to redirect traffic to this other region just in case. Whereas if you're even a Delta, it's like, and you have a data center, you don't have 80 data centers, you don't have 10 data centers, you don't have 5 data centers, you have one, maybe I got one here, I got one in Europe, maybe, like you've got just as much as you need. Whereas like Salesforce or Amazon, they've got data centers everywhere. They've got regions in Canada, Washington, Indianapolis, New York, Virginia, like all over the place. Heroku, same thing. They're all over the country. So it's like, if one of these systems gets borked by something like this, which can happen, like don't get me wrong, like this CrowdStrike thing is scary and could hit people like AWS and like Heroku. But the thing that I'm trying to draw attention to here is that when you are part of that Salesforce trust layer, and when you're in that circle and you deploy your mission critical apps there, you have that entire team mobilized, like Justin just mentioned. Like their sole purpose in life is to make sure Salesforce works and to make Heroku work, and also sell it. That's it. Like that's all they do. They market, they sell, and they make sure that stuff works. So when you look at, hey, let me go like pull up Salesforce's last quarterly report, you're looking at their expense report of all the IT and product staff they have, and that, like that number that they spend, I guarantee you is probably bigger than most IT budgets are there, but the companies are affected, and probably several of them combined, because their sole purpose in life is to make sure stuff like this does not happen, and to have disaster mitigation plans and rollout plans and backups on top of backups and tertiary and backups there. And so that's the thing that like for people who are sitting here that were affected by this and are really looking at, man, do I need to have this vertical integration? Because there are use cases where you do. Like there are I don't want to just like pick a bunch of people off and say it's like, oh, you're all idiots for not being on AWS. Like there's a bunch of good reasons to have your system set up like this, and this was just a catastrophe, and you're going to be crawling up CrowdStrike's to make sure something like this never happens again, and then have alternative backups and whatnot to figure out to avoid this. Like everyone's going to be studying how to deal with this, so this type of situation is mitigated if you're stuck here. But if you're not tied to this, if you're just using it out of convenience, if you bought this solution from another company through some M&A and they're using this type of paradigm because that's what they've done for the last 20 years, like it might be time to make the switch. It might be time to start making the switch. Because even as an example, let's say your edge devices, right? You're company A and you're like, we're all Windows. We're using all Windows laptops because we use Excel and Teams and whatnot, but we've got Salesforce and we got some Azure stuff, right? And we built some custom apps to do whatever it is, right? And we access it through our Windows machines. No one's got Windows phones anymore, but everyone has iOS and Android phones, right? And if you're trying to make a native Windows app that's client-based, accessible to mobile, that's kind of a pain to do. Like you want to first do like a progressive web app or do some like Electron, thing, or build something like on Ionic that's cross-platform capable, that it is also deployed to Windows, something that's web-based technology so that you can at least like use it like outside of that, right? Before you even start having this conversation. And a lot of these Windows applications are all built on C#, and you can access it through the internet, but insofar as that I have my Windows machine and talks to the server. If you're on Heroku, it is mobile. Like anyone who's building on Heroku or AWS or Salesforce, they're all mobile first paradigms. Lightning is a mobile first paradigm. The work that we do here at RadialSpark is mostly Node.js focused, Node, Angular, Nest, things like that. Like we are using JavaScript. We are mobile first. Like your app, when it deployed on your monitor, is also going to work on your cell phone. Like that's the whole idea. So if I'm on a Windows machine right now doing this broadcast, and boom, I get hit with this and it goes down, guess what? I'm logging into Google Meet on my phone, Like,
Yeah.
I'm pulling up my app on my phone that I built that's running on Heroku, and I'm continuing about my day while I'm calling Justin and be like, Justin, my computer's down. Ah, like.
So when his
and-
computer breaks, he dials back in on his phone while I quietly jump off the broadcast to go pull my hair out. Well, I mean, I would, but there's not much left to pull out.
But it's like we keep operating. We're not dead in the water. And the thing that you got to ask yourself is, if you're in this position, if you have Salesforce and you're like, man, I've been thinking about moving more of the stuff to the cloud. I've got this legacy stuff, but it works. It's okay. You should really be like, this is the wake-up call. I should not be this vertically integrated. I need to start offloading, maybe not all of your stuff, but start thinking about some mission critical apps that you want to offload to a firm like Salesforce, like Heroku, whose IT budget dwarfs anything that you could possibly muster and still be financially viable by orders of magnitude. Like, you need to be like, let's go with an easier paradigm, and let's go with all the creature comforts the cloud brings, the DevOps pipeline that Heroku brings, the fact that you don't have to manage your network infrastructure, the fact that you don't have to manage your security because you have private spaces out of the box, the fact that you don't have to manage HIPAA encryption concerns because you're using Shield. And that data can then get directly integrated through to your Salesforce platform to do your CRM processes through a secure, HIPAA compliant, encrypted connection out of the box on one platform that, you know, if there's going to be an incident, they're going to be able to pivot you quickly. And this has happened before, where they had I think several years ago, where they had that DNS outage that took out several services. They started moving people to those that were not on that same DNS, and you're able to do that. Whereas if you're just sitting there with a server farm and Windows apps, you're at the mercy of how fast your IT team can move. And I guarantee you, it's not as fast as you need it. It's $5.4 billion slow. Like, yeah, that's how slow it is.
Well, and I mean, I feel like this is probably an eye opener for several organizations, and you have to look at, like, what did this cost you? Because you look at, what are you spending currently on your IT, like your staff, your infrastructure, all of that, and what was your cost from this incident? And you look at that dollar figure, and then you compare that against, like, okay, if I'm not holding on to all of this because I need to hold on to all of this, and when I say need, I'm talking like regulatory requirements, like things where it's like, in order to operate in this industry, to handle this kind of data, like, there is a requirement to do this in a way that you are in full control over. Like, I need to do it because it's the way we're all doing it. That is not a need. That's I don't want to spend money on change. So if you don't need to do this, and you look at what this cost you in this instance, and then you compare that to, like, okay, what would it cost to start moving something like this over here? Because odds are, when you look at, like, infrastructure pricing, things like that, these platforms, these services like Heroku, they're going to cost you a little bit more than you doing it all yourself. But again, Spider-Man principle: with great power comes great responsibility. If you don't want your smaller, leaner IT team to be responsible for fixing this when this happens, you're like, okay, Heroku's IT spend is this, my IT spend is this, and my cost goes up this much, but my cost in this incident was.
Why would I would say, like that might be the case for some customers, for some of you out there that are looking at this, because you look at the list price of Heroku versus like raw Azure or AWS or doing it on your server farms. You're like, I don't want to pay that monthly spend. They get the security and all the benefits we just talked about, but it's so expensive. But the thing is that you're now freeing up IT resources to mobilize them, not at managing your network, not at managing your security, not at managing the low-level maintenance of your day-to-day, just keeping the machines running, because that's all paid for by that. So all those people you've hired, which I guarantee you aren't cheap salaries, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars per person per year that you're spending on these people. Maybe not 100,000, at least $100,000. Like, you're in that six-figure range. for a lot of these individuals to manage that kind of stuff. Even if you try to offshore, outshore, whatnot, like again, like these like network and security specialists and engineers do not come cheap. They straight up don't. Like you cannot, and you don't want the cheap ones because then you're really at risk. So it's like when something like this happens, you recover. Yeah, exactly. So when you look at that and you're like, hey, like there's an incremental increase in monthly licensing cost. It's like, yeah, but look at all the money I save on not spending on payroll for people that are not advancing my business. Because and I'm not saying you lay those people off, but you're able to reprioritize those people and focus them on making your business run better, whether just day-to-day operational improvements or actually innovating, actually doing the thing that like building the customer facing apps that make your business spark, that really make you guys shine, that like integrating and migrating and buying different companies and consolidating all those problems that businesses have where you're trying to get two different organizations to work together and all the IT struggles with that. They're focused on that, not, yo, Justin, yeah, so the DNS over here was having an issue and I tried to update, Windows, and I was in the regedit and, we were having some kernel error and dude, it's just crashed. I can't even get to BIOS. And you just send a bunch of words. You're just like, I don't know what that has to do with how do I get this quote out quicker? How do I make this happen faster? Yeah. How do I make this customer experience better? Like you need to focus on the stuff that makes you better. And I think this is the time that you need to give platform, like I would just straight up say, like, if you're on Salesforce in particular, you need to give Heroku a look. You need to be like, how do I get my apps over here so that I can focus on that? So I don't have a bunch of DevOps people because it's done for you. It's all run through GitHub. You don't have to deal with it. Like they've solved all these problems and you take that money and either just straight up save it or you reallocate those people to making your business better, faster, and quicker. Because again, like I mentioned, we're in the age of AI and it's not going to get any easier for these type of security threats. So you either got to buckle up and start really investing in that or finding partners that have a proven track record of doing it right, which is Salesforce and Heroku, in my opinion. Justin, I think I had a good sign off there, but if you want to add anything before we call it quits, do we miss anything? Are we dramatic enough? Have we scared everyone?
Well, I was going to say, I think maybe the only thing we haven't touched on, and just to make sure people understand, like, this won't be a one-off, and it already isn't a one-off. Like, you do need to take these kinds of instances very seriously because back in 2010, there was an update on McAfee actually that came out and incorrectly recognized a core Windows file as a virus and deleted it and stalled. It was hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Windows machines. Like 14 years ago, not quite to this scale, but still massive. And I don't call this out to be like, hey, operational failures, problems. Like, when you're fighting this cybersecurity battle and you're trying to handle 0 hour, 0 day threats, getting updates out to your customers to secure their businesses. Because I think here's like the one thing to call out, right? This outage that BSOD'd 8.5 million machines and did $5.4 billion of damage, it just took computers offline. Actual cyber threats, like malicious actors, they do this for profit, like ransomware, corporate espionage, like international espionage. If these businesses don't prioritize the speed and get the security out to protect you from people that will legitimately steal your stuff, like that 5.4 would be even bigger. So they're doing the best they can. But this has happened before because the nature of this business, the need for rapid response, does leave a degree of exposure on the quality control side because you can't test something for months if you need to release it in hours. And so it can happen. It has happened. It did happen. It will happen again. So you have to figure out as a company, when it does happen, what do I want my IT exposure to be? What am I willing to invest in handling this? And that's like when you understand that and you bring that in, and then you think about the partners, like, and I've been saying this like since we started working together, Mike, like, know your core competency, lean into your core competency. If it's not a thing that makes you money, if it's not the thing you're strongest at, don't waste your energy on it. Find somebody that makes their money solving that problem for you and make it their problem. Because I guarantee you, like Heroku and AWS, I don't know. I haven't actually checked. They might use the Linux installations for CrowdStrike internally. And I guarantee you, when things like this happen, they are staring at it and they're like, okay, what do we have to do to make sure we never go down like this?
I'm
They're
pretty sure
already
there's a couple
preemptively
people.
planning.
I'm pretty sure there's a couple people on the product team that you know that we met at TDX that are already sweating bullets, going like, "Oh my!" Like we. But the thing is that that's what they're there for. Like that's the only reason they're there, and they have way more infrastructure, way more money behind them to handle that problem. Whereas you at Hospital A or Wall Street Company B, like straight up doesn't. Like you just don't, and you won't, and you shouldn't.
I mean, you know, not to gloat, but for those of you who haven't guessed, we use Heroku over here at RadialSpark, and there's a reason I've been smiling and laughing as we talk about this, and it's because I haven't been crying, and I haven't had to hand Michael my resignation or have a panic attack about this. Like,
he's already lost his hair though, so he might be hiding something. So we don't.
No, the hat's hiding something.
Oh,
I'm not.
okay.
The point is, you know, if we're gonna say the proof is in the pudding, like, yeah, we are a smaller consultancy company. Like, we're not a Delta, we're not a whatever, but like, this happened. We are an organization that prefers Windows machines ourselves. And I haven't had a heart attack in the past couple of weeks. Like, my sailing has been smooth. Our websites haven't gone down. Our services haven't gone down. My customers, because we do custom development as a consultancy for other companies, they're not calling me freaking out about this outage. Like, having Heroku as a partner has been a godsend for us during this whole thing. And so, you know, I guess like as a real life case study, like, here's the proof. Having the right people on your team that look out for this, that know how to respond to this, that their whole product strategy is around making sure that I'm not calling them freaking out because people are calling me freaking out. Like, having that horsepower on your defensive line is huge. That I honestly would say you probably can't put a price tag on it.
I would agree. So since we both agree with each other, yeah, that'll conclude this special episode of RadialSpark Radio. This is a bit of a weird one, but we live in a weird age. We'll be back in a week or two with some more articles that we'll be reviewing, some more exciting things coming up with our traditional stuff, talking about like data
Fun,
cloud
exciting,
and,
not scary, exciting.
fun, exciting, like how to build cool and better apps and integrate that with your IT infrastructure. Not like, why is the magic smoke coming out of my Windows machine right now?
Yeah.
So we'll leave it there, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you guys are looking at trying to make a switch and be like, hey, is this feasible? How much money is this going to cost or whatnot? If you're one of those companies that is like, hey, like, this is a wake-up call for us, like, we want to start migrating some of the stuff over the cloud, we'll give you guys a free health check. Give Peyton a call, shoot him an email. Links will be in the description below. Give your Salesforce rep a call as well. They'll point you to the right place, and hopefully that'll also be us. And if that's it, guys, take care, and we'll catch you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.